Hey everyone, welcome to SOFcast. This is your host, Matt Parrish. And today we've got an awesome opportunity. One of our favorite episodes, one of the episodes that was reviewed the highest from you, the listeners, was last season when we talked to a 10th group team. We had some leadership from a 10th group team that was active in the team room. Identity sort of erased, a little bit anonymous, but straight from the team room. Hey, this is what happened on our last rotation. This is sort of what we think about the state of SF. And so today we want to collide two major topics. One, hey, let's get some input straight from a team room, but also as we look at the turmoil in Eastern Europe and we look at the new information warfare age that we're in, as we see warfare, playing out on the ground as it always has, but also the information and influence warfare that is now hyper-enabled by things like the internet and social media and things like that. We wanted to talk to some folks that specialize in that side of it. So today we've got an awesome opportunity to talk to some psychological operations operators, some PSYOPers, so to speak. And today, as I said, just like the 10th group episode, we're going to go by code names just to give them some anonymity. So today I'm excited to bring on some PSYOPs leaders, team leaders, CJ and Wilk. CJ, Wilk, thanks for joining us. How are you guys doing today?
Hey, good, Sergeant Major. Appreciate you having us on. We're looking forward to the conversation.
Good. Just happy to be here, Matt. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk about this. This is something that, you can't turn on the news. Obviously, you can't pull up social media, anything else, and not see, as I said, this obviously huge impact that it's having right now in Eastern Europe. But it's been interesting, for us as professional soldiers, as members of the special operations community, to see how much impact the social media and internet side of these things has had on all of the sort of Eastern European stuff. So before we get to that, though, PSYOPs is, a little bit shielded, a little bit clouded, a little bit not as well known as some of the other MOSs or jobs or specialties within special operations, within Army Special Operations specifically, but within all of U.S. Special Operations Command. So for both of you all, as you were kind of coming up and you decide to serve, you see PSYOPs. First off, what was the call for you? What was your impression of psychological operations? What made you want to go do that? And then secondly, what was kind of that assessment selection process and qualification course like? I guess, Wilk, let's go to you first, and then we'll go CJ.
Okay. It was an interesting road to where I am now. I actually started off in Intel back in third group. Mm-hmm. And after several rotations over to Afghanistan, I wanted the opportunity to do something a little more special, get me to see a lot more of the world. So I actually tried out on a path through SOFcast. After that didn't work out, I talked to a few PSYOPers that I knew. I learned that at that point in time, most of the guys who were over in the regiment were still going over to Afghanistan. But I knew that if you chose language from a different COCOM, you could potentially go see a different part of the world. And I was kind of tired of the Afghanistan thing. So went over to POAS, did the POQC qualification course.
So PSYOPs qualification course, right? Yeah, okay.
Gotcha. PSYOPs qualification course, yeah. Yes, Matt.
Yeah, so POAS is y'all's assessment and selection, right?
Assessment and selection.
Yeah, psych op assessment selection. I got you. I'm just making sure I'm on board. Keep going.
oh yeah. Sorry. All these acronyms. I should know better.
That's all right.
So I had selected a European language. I selected Russian as my language. Mm-hmm. Actually had a good knack for it. And during the course, with all of the cultural teachings in the course, I learned more about the region, more about Eastern Europe as a whole, understanding that it was so much different from everything that I dealt with in Afghanistan from 2005 to 2009. I was already sold. So learning more about the job, understanding how much of the job focused on learning about cultures, demographics, and accessibility, the things that make people do what they do.
Yeah.
That spoke to me in a different way than Intel did. And after joining the regiment in 2014 and meeting up with some of the legacy guys and learning more about my upcoming rotation back in 2014, that was pretty much all I needed. And after that first rotation, I was so.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we look at special operations. You kind of highlighted it there, Wilk. I mean, influence on people, on people groups, all those things. I mean, that is really, it doesn't really only land in the 37 career field, right? Like, it's not just a PSYOP thing. I mean, everything that 18 series are doing, it's about influencing. 38's about influencing. As far as our civil affairs, it's just different ways to sort of approach people and their needs and how they consume information, what makes them, like you said, what makes them do what they do. So we need all of those angles. So CJ, as a captain or as an officer on your side, as you're looking at what you want to do next, Wilt talked about a little bit as sort of an enlisted guy, 37 Fox. For you, thinking about 37 Alpha or PSYOPs team leader, what kind of drew you there? What were your perceptions, and what made you think, okay, hey, that's where I want to go?
Yeah, Matt. So for me, I was a logistics officer prior to coming over to PSYOP. When I got my bachelor's degree from the University of San Francisco, it was in media studies, and that covered everything from target audience analysis, which is, a core function of PSYOP, to journalism. And, we got into some of the production side, documentary production, audio engineering. So I already kind of had a background in that area to begin with. I was in Hawaii at the time. I got a random call from a SORB recruiter, an SF major, very resourceful, those SORB recruiters. I don't know how he got my phone number, but he did. And he was just like, hey, well, you want to join SOF? And I was like, I'll come to the brief. Let's check it out. So I attended that and got the brief from all three. I heard about what PSYOP does. Very, vague, of course. But they talked a lot about the deployment opportunities, working in the embassy, going to the tactical side. And so there was deployment opportunities, which is something I didn't have in Hawaii, which was very interesting to me and something I wanted to take advantage of, as well as just the team dynamic. I kind of got cheated out of my platoon leader time. Our company XO, his data rank got changed. He had to leave for career course early. So I only had about 9 months of PL time. And that's, that's what I enjoyed. And that's why I joined the Army to begin with, was to be a leader and be with the team. So that's what drew me to attend assessment and selection. I went, was it 2018? I went to assessment and selection. The caveat was, hey, you can go to selection, and even if you get selected, you can choose not to do it. So there was really no reason for me not to take advantage of the opportunity. So I did. And, I enjoyed assessment and selection, believe it or not. And I decided that I was going to take advantage and then go all in on it. So left Hawaii, got on a plane, woke up in the middle of summer in Georgia for airborne school. That was a rude awakening. And then hit the Q course at Fort Bragg. And the Q course for the officers, a little bit different than the NCOs. They split us up a little bit. We focused a lot on, it's changed since I've been through.
Sure.
I can't talk on what it's like now, but we all do
it's changed like
analysis.
Ours has changed like 16 times since I went through. We got to change it every year on every side, so that way no one gets all the intel before. But yeah, you can talk about what it was when you were there. It's all good.
Yeah, exactly. I won't give everything away, but we focused a lot on MDMP, which is something all the captains hit in career course. But just the PSYOP input to MDMP.
So if you're a civilian listener out there, military decision-making process, sort of a logical way that we approach amorphous problems and how we troop lead, how we come to course of action development, things like that, so that we can make the right decision. And PSYOPs has their lens and their input on that. So obviously as a captain, that's your bread and butter. So it totally makes sense to really hone in on that as part of your 37 Alpha. And I'll give a shout out to that SORB recruiter, whoever he was, because if you're looking for background for a PSYOP or for influence, I got to say that your background of having target demographic analysis and things like that, pretty solid. So shout out to that guy to find the right person for the right seat. So as you're going through that qualification course,
he did his research apparently. And it worked out.
I don't know how he got it either, but that's pretty solid. I think one thing that both of you guys kind of hit on, which I think is interesting, and we'll talk about this throughout this episode, but both of you hit on wanting to have real world mission possibilities, right? So that's something that reverberates around our community. Most of us that have been in only during the global war on terrorism sort of time frame, that hasn't been a concern, right? Like if you came in like I did in early GWAT, like you knew you had real world mission possibilities. But I remember talking to those prior guys prior to 9/11 that had been in SF, and a trip down south for us in 7th Group to do a real-world mission, counter-drug, or some sort of subject matter exchange, that was a huge deal. Like, you were fighting for that. Those weren't growing on trees. And so I think both of you, sort of the call was, hey, global war on terrorism coming to an end. How can I not only be surrounded by the best people in my career field, but also get an opportunity to go out and do it and not just sit around? And SOF has those opportunities across all of our different jobs, our rates, MOSs, AFSCs, whatever your flavor is. But that is one of our, value propositions is, hey, if you come, we're gonna put you through a lot of training, but we're also going to give you an opportunity to go out and engage with partners and do it outside of just a training scenario here in the States. So it sounds like for both of you, that was a pivotal siren call, which obviously paid off because you both just recently redeployed from European soil with an opportunity to do these things. So I'm curious, as we fast forward sort of to now and sort of recent time frames as we're looking through all this, how do you feel like that qualification course and those training, how did it prepare you for this last real world deployment? Do you feel like it's pretty on track? Do you feel like you have a lot of lessons learned brought back that you want to inject back into that process? What's your lens? CJ, I'll throw it to you first on that.
Yeah, I think the qualification course, it definitely gives you all the baseline understanding that you need in order to really dive in and learn what you need to know for your COCOM once you get to your unit. It can only be so long. You can only cram so much in there. And the staple really is the target audience analysis process, how to identify and do an analysis on a target audience in order to, conduct operations. And, with that baseline, every COCOM is different. The running joke in the Q course, we'd have a lot of captains and majors come talk to us, and there'd always be somebody in the class that they'd raise their hand and be like, hey, so what does PSYOP do? Because no one really had a.
Hey, that was my next question. Don't steal my next question, CJ. No, I'm just kidding. Keep going.
Yeah. No. We'll keep it rolling. And the answer, it was so different for every single officer. So, yeah. And that's something that you learn after you get out of the Q course. Every deployment, every experience is so different that you can't really tell somebody, hey, this is exactly what you're going to do when you get to your unit.
Yeah.
So I think it's a challenge for the Q course to, prepare you for a specific unit or rotation. And the intent really, is and needs to stay, here's the baseline information you need to know in order to really excel once you get to your unit. You conduct that pre-mission training, you get your road to war brief. So you already speak the language, and that you can, you're in a position to, consume the rest of the information that you need to succeed. So
no, it's a phenomenal point. Yeah, it's a phenomenal point, and it's something that I think is uniting across SOF. I know it at least from the 18 series, or SF perspective. If you're a civilian, 37 series PSYOPs, 18 series SF or Special Forces, I've said it a couple times. I just want to make sure it's clear because it's easier for us to just converse in that language. But it's something it rings true to the 18 series side as well. In a qualification course, I often say when I'm talking to people about sort of SOF is if there's a very clearly defined process already in place and you just need somebody to go execute that exact clear-cut process, you don't really need SOF, right? Like it's already decided, it's already clear-cut. That's not what you need us for, right? It doesn't matter whether it's on the influence side, whether it's on, more of the tactical side. Like what you need us for is we have all of the tools available and we're going to go assess the situation, figure out exactly what needs to be, cut out of stone to kind of create that path and then execute it. And I think, both of our qualification courses, nobody comes out of the SFQ course or the PSYOPS course and is like, I am fully ready to do whatever, but they've got a good baseline so that then as you go into pre-mission training, we can hone and start to really focus our efforts based on the situation. We're not bringing a hammer and looking for everything to be a nail. We're bringing a whole, host of tools and ready to see what the situation is. Will, I'm curious from your side, as we talk specifically, CJ talked about coming out of the Q course and then going to pre-mission training. What's kind of the pre-mission? How do you PMT for something like an Eastern Europe deployment right now? Obviously keeping it available for us to release here on the open source podcast. But I'm curious, like, that situation is so dynamic. It's changing so much. What is pre-mission training looking like for you all to go over there right now?
So it's kind of like CJ hitting on. It's kind of a different picture depending on where you're headed to. And each COCOM has a different, I guess you could say, problem set that they're trying to tackle. Us for Europe, we've kind of been dealing with the same thing since like 2014. So we kind of base how we're going to structure our pre-mission training off our mission guidance letters from for COCOM. Europe COCOM is SOC Euro's mission guidance letter. And most of the time we're definitely focusing on ways to, I guess you could say, look at what you're seeing all the time from rotation to rotation and finding ways around like things that teams that went before you did well and didn't do good, and then just trying to make sure you set your team up for success. Us specifically, we wanted to, especially understanding what was going on in the news, like find ways to take advantage of some of the courses that are offered through like the Joint Special Operations University, namely the National Resistance course. Mm-hmm. And we incorporated some of the lessons learned from that course throughout PMT. We try to create subject matter experts within the detachment to be able to work in 1 to 2 man teams, offering up influence and resistance type training wherever that opportunity presented itself throughout the rotation. Outside of that, we know that we're working with a lot of European partners, so understanding how their weapon systems worked was going to be key. So we dabbled a lot with understanding foreign weapons. And on top, the key thing for us as PSYDET is digging into the, I guess you could say, target audience analysis of the region.
Sure.
Understanding most of the problem sets, understanding what's out there in the information environment, and already doing some of your PNICI variables, I guess, training for the newcomers to the detachment who are coming straight out of the qualification course, who might not understand some of the intricacies that are involved with the COCOM. So taking them all individually, giving them their own like variable, like political. I want you to look at the region from a political lens.
Sure.
I want you to look at this region from a military lens, and then filtering the news through those lenses to help shape their perspective and have them think correctly about what they were going into as far as the mission. So
Sure, yeah, and if you're from outside the military or from outside SOF, outside the military because conventional uses as well. PMISI's talking about is just a wide range. I don't want to go into a PMISI class on the podcast, but yeah, I mean just a wide-ranging analysis tool of different lenses to look at a country or an area or a people group or a problem in order to see kind of a full-rounded analysis before you go in. So you hit on a key point there, a PSYDET, right? Like obviously as an SF guy, I'm very familiar with our 12-person team, different specialties, all that stuff. Can you kind of walk us through like what's a PSYDET look like? What's a PSYOPS team look like? What are the specialties sort of inherent to it? And then, how do you guys mobilize that? You talked about breaking down into 1 or 2 person teams, but what's that base team look like?
Yeah. So again, it's one of the things. It's going to be different.
Sure.
For every mission set, every FTN. They're calling. If you're a 1-person team deployed somewhere, you're still going to be referred to as a PSYDET, right?
Okay.
So it's really completely dependent on the mission. I can say for our rotation, we did have a split. We had people that focused on military partner engagement. So similar to what SF guys do, we would just do that with, military partners in Europe.
Sure.
But in relation, to PSYOP. And then we had a team that worked with the embassy, right? So that team's training looks a little bit different than the military's the partner engagement team's training. So I think at the end of the day for PMT, it really comes down to mission analysis and getting linked in with the currently deployed team as soon as possible. They're your best source of information.
Yeah.
Like Wilk said, you have, a mission guidance letter that you can reference. And of course, whatever the last rotation did for their PMT, but conditions change. And so does your PMT. There's not really hey, you're going to do X, Y, Z for PMT. It's fairly, the teams have a good amount of autonomy when it comes to planning their PMT. And that's, of course, going to be also dictated on what the team disposition looks like. And that, again, changes with every rotation. So it's hard to nail it down. What does a PSYDET look like? We had 12 people on our team, and we had that split right down the middle.
Sure.
6 and 6, mill-to-mill engagement and embassy support. And I'll spare the details on that. Again, the goal is to get this out into the environment, but
No, I got you, man. That's great.
I hope that answers the question.
No, it does.
As big as that was.
Yeah, no, I get it. But it highlights one of the other kind of keys that I think, if I'm listening to this from outside of SOF, right? One of the other key things that SOF provides is more autonomy to shape your team, your PMT, all of those things like we talked about, to what the mission is. Like, it is not a clear-cut, well-defined, hey, you're always going to have this and you're going to keep exactly like this and you're going to do this, because if that is the case, then you don't need SOF for that problem, right? And so I think the opportunity to have the autonomy to be trusted as professionals and to have a support structure around you to enable you to analyze what you need and to be able to shape and mold your training and sometimes even your manpower or disposition in order to best meet that problem. And that problem giving you, as we said earlier, the opportunity to go out and actually do it on a real world scale, as opposed to only just continuing to train it here in the States. So no, I think, obviously we can't go too deep. If you're a listener, if you've gotten this far, I think you already realize, like, we can't go too deep on some of these things because, we're not trying to give the enemy anything that they can use against us. And I don't think any of you will hold that against us as Americans. So I am, interested in sort of interrelation between 37, 18 series and PSYOP, SF. Back in season 2, we talked with that ODA that I mentioned earlier from 10th Special Forces Group, who obviously their area of responsibility, or COCOM, as you guys have been, sort of referring to it as, is Europe, right? And they talked about coming back from Eastern Europe themselves and talked about working with cross-functional teams, right? Meaning that multiple different special operations skill sets coming together. In this case, Special Forces, PSYOPs coming together, working on a problem together. So we talk about that, and it's it's easy to say, oh yeah, we'll just do CFT, cross-functional teams. Everybody will work together. It'd be great. You guys are both professional, SOF, whatever else. But I'm curious on your lens now, having just returned from a deployment in Europe. Did you have the opportunity to work together as cross-functional teams, and was that successful? Were there things that you brought back, lessons learned wise, that need to be injected back into either your community, the 18 series community, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. We were lucky enough. We conducted our validation exercise with our task group. Mm-hmm. And the civil affairs team that was going to be deployed with us was there as well. So we really did have a cross-functional team validation exercise.
So that's at the end of PMT prior to deploying, right? So validation, correct, once you've done PMT or pre-mission training, and then now, hey, our CFT or our cross-functional team ready to go execute, correct?
Yes, correct.
All right, perfect.
And it was a good experience. I think the exercise itself, it was a company level FTX really that us and the CA team attended. So the scenario for PSYOP and CA was a little bit underwhelming, and I think that could be an improve going forward. But that really wasn't the benefit. We had an OC from our battalion that, he had his list, and he ensured that we were given the opportunity to, conduct everything we needed to be validated. So it was fine in that regard. But I think the biggest benefit to us going there was, one, just getting introduced to everybody prior to getting on ground. I think, showing up to your deployed location and meeting your task group commander for the first time, I think that's the wrong answer. And I personally think CJ's opinion here that needs to be, a standard in the SOF enterprise going forward versus, hey, if you can make it happen, that's great. Because that's kind of what it is right now. If you can do something with your task group and everybody, whether it's a CTC rotation or, joint FTX or whatever it is, it's kind of just like, hey, if it fits, it fits. If not, you'll meet them when you get there.
Yeah. I think, do you think that's sort of legacy from, when we were just going back GWAT rotation after rotation, PSYOP, CA, and SF together at fire bases, and it just sort of became, yeah, all right, well, you're not going to meet them because our rotations are different. To me, I'm betting that's still living on from that sort of legacy of like, oh yeah, you'll meet them when you get to the fire base, and you've done a rotation before, they've done a rotation before, like you guys will mesh. And I think it's great critique to make sure that, hey, this is, we're going to a completely different environment, we're doing completely different things. Like we need to, in some ways, break out. We need to use everything that we learned from GWAT, but in some ways we got to break out of some of those sort of bad habits in some places. Do you think that's fair criticism?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think the biggest benefit for us was we were able to, we gave essentially our mission concept brief to the task group so they could understand exactly what we were deploying, what our mission was when we deploy. And we were able to familiarize them with our PSYOP process, with our CONOPS. What do our CONOPS look like?
Yeah.
So that when, we got on ground, they knew what questions to ask, and there wasn't a lag at the task group level. If there was, it was higher up than that.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest benefit, and just getting to know everybody on the teams. We got capability briefs from the civil affairs team, the ODAs, and that created an environment downrange where we're all we do have our own very specific mission sets deployed, right? But we might meet somebody and we're like, we know what CA does, we know what this ODA is doing, and we meet this person and we're like, hey, you need to meet this other person that we know.
Yeah,
and if we didn't have the opportunity to do that prior to deployment, we probably wouldn't be in that environment deployed, just because once you get on ground, it's hot and heavy.
And just to add to that, Matt, having those opportunities where the task group could all be together before the rotation cuts down on those. It avoids those scenarios where you're in a deployed environment and now you're constantly needing to explain, usually to like a 18 series.
I was going to say, go ahead and say it.
Command team, hey, who's always asking, hey, what do you guys do? What do you guys do? And one of Wilk's pet peeves, my pet peeves, because I mean, this was deployment number 7. We've been together long enough where the question of what either group does shouldn't be such a thing anymore. But especially over in UCOM, we kind of got used to the CENTCOM fight. Over in UCOM, it's very important that we all know what we all do, and those combined Valexes, it just cuts down on those scenarios where that aggravating conversation has to take place, and No,
I completely understand. I'm curious, and I think I'm interested in your lens on this, because one of the things that SF as Special Forces, our core missions are, the most tactical ones are the easiest ones to replicate when we want to do an eval or we want to do training and things like that. Because, yes, you need support to be able to set up the house and role players and whatever else, but it's much easier because it's much easier to define. It's much easier to control that size of an objective in order to get, fully immersive training, all those things. And the further away you get from the very tactical side of our, core missions, the harder it is to practice those in a training scenario. And for you all in psychological operations, I mean, that is – I'm going back to sort of CJ saying, hey, in this PMT, in this eval, the PSYOP part was a little bit light, because for me, as if I'm, the senior enlisted leader of that task group, like, it's so hard for me to create a situation to fully replicate a people group that you have to fully do analysis on, and then you have to, work to do all of your core missions to influence, because it's not clearly defined, but it's also not easy to replicate. And so I'm curious, have you guys seen that so far in your training, and is there something to learn on how we can potentially do it better?
So during my planning time, I was over at the 2nd Cavalry Regiment for 3 years.
Okay.
And while out there, we'd regularly go over to the Joint Multinational Readiness Center over in Hohenfels.
Okay.
And over at that CTC, they did a great job. The behind the scenes crew for the information environment, their digital sandbox that they created was so realistic to what I had experienced on the UCOM rotations.
That's great.
And what I learned from a few individuals who recently returned from a JRTC rotation over in Louisiana is that their digital sandbox is pretty much up to par with the JMRCs. So in my opinion, if there was a way to create the scenario where the TG that's already identified to be in the slate to go on an upcoming rotation can be scheduled for one of those soft specific digital sandbox CTCs like JRTC or JMRC, and also have the opportunity to bring along their civil affairs team that's slated for the rotation and their PSYOPS detachment that's slated for that rotation, that might be an opportunity where everybody gets what they want. The 18 series could run through reps of realistic representation of what would happen in Europe. The PSYDET will have all the infrastructure, the civilians on the battlefield, all the stuff in the social media sphere, all the stuff that you may realistically see over in UCOM. And then same thing for the civil affairs team. That might be what has to happen, or the best case scenario, in my opinion. So
no, it's a great point. I'm glad you made it. I think that is a best case scenario, because I think we've shied away, especially I'll just speak from I won't even speak for my community. I'll just speak for myself. Like we shy away, if you're listening and you're not familiar with some of those acronyms, CTC, Big Combined Training Center. The Army has got these places set up. You can kind of infer from what Wilk's talking about. where there are massive backside support and infrastructure in order to create realistic, scenarios for all different types of jobs, right? And there's a huge landmass, there's a digital sandbox, there's all these things to be able to do. We have shied away from that, especially during GWAT, because it wasn't sustainable, the time frame. There was all these conventional forces going through those CTCs and everything else to be able to get worked into those things and everything else, especially when we're looking at a very, as I mentioned earlier, like very tactically defined, sort of mission set for us in SF at least. There wasn't really a necessity like, oh, I have to go somewhere where there's this huge infrastructure because I can make the other company that's not going, they can play backside support for me, and I can get a really good tactical, pre-mission training, right? Now, not meaning that we didn't go other places and whatever else, but it wasn't as necessary when you're in a very tactical environment and it's somewhere that most of your team's gone before and all those things. But now as we look at this new frontier, I think it's a great point, Wilk, and I'm glad to hear like your personal kind of lens and experience on that, because these CTCs have grown leaps and bounds over that time because they get the lessons learned back, and they're shaping and they're well funded in order to create these environments. So I think it's very interesting. We hit on a little bit of 18 series, 37 series stuff. I'm just curious, before we move into specifically Eastern Europe, like as an 18 series guy myself, like what you talked, Wilk, about the conversation. I'm glad you actually said 18 series because I thought you were going to let us off the hook and say, sometimes I have to keep explaining what we do. From your lens, like what do you want me to know as an 18 series guy about how to better integrate with PSYOP when it comes to task group, when it comes to cross-functional team?
Well, first, I think that a common thread that I've seen often is the 18 series segment of the UCOM rotation will bring their CENTCOM or their AFRICOM experience to UCOM, not understanding that in UCOM, with a bunch of developed nations and individual nations, sovereign nations, with that comes a whole lot of rules. There's permissions that are needed. There's concurrences that are needed. Yeah. Things move a lot slower because things have to go up the chain. So when it comes to PSYOP, that stuff really, really plays a big role in, how things flow, like how the job has to work. Most of the 18 series command teams that I've encountered have come with that CENTCOM lens. They've worked with PSYOPers only in CENTCOM. Right. They've seen how things kind of flow in the CENTCOM arena during like that GWAT era, not understanding that things are completely different over in UCOM. So when they're hearing the capabilities brief from the PSYDET and they're hearing, how things kind of have to roll from the PSYDET lens to be effective, to most effectively support our partners and what they're asking for, to, if you're not going to fully understand it, to at least just trust the PSYDET team leadership of what they're saying, and then just be supportive. Just support what they're saying. And if they're tying the command team to individuals at the TSOC who could better explain it, or if they need a bigger explanation or to just cross-reference things, just use that PSYDET. Trust that what they're saying, that specifically when it comes to UCOM, that we have that rapport with the TSOC and they have our back, and we're not going to stray that command team in an erroneous direction. So
yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, we're all learning. We've all done multiple rotations into CENTCOM and some of our brothers and sisters into AFRICOM and other places, and you know what you know, right? And you always default back to what you know. So it's always those command teams I know are trying to evolve their own 18 series sort of techniques, tactics, and procedures. How like you said, time frames of what they expect. When you're in Afghanistan, there's a little bit quicker flash to bang on being able to do some things because it's a well-worn path. And I'm sure, as they're doing that, they've also got to learn all of the different, sort of other parts of that cross-functional team that hey, what I got or what I'm used to from a PSYOP team or a civil affairs team or whatever in the past, like they have to evolve too. So yeah, I'm sure there's definitely some interplay there. CJ, from the officer side, from 37 Alpha side, what's your sort of lens if you're talking to either me as an 18 Zulu, an 18 Alpha, or someone else on that cross-functional team? What do you want them to know about PSYOPs in order to be better partners?
Yeah, I think, for everybody, the important thing to keep in mind when it comes to PSYOP is every action that you take can potentially send a message in the information domain, right?
Yeah.
So the way you conduct yourself with partners, if there's a mishap in training, like that's all stuff that is going to have an effect in the information domain. So that's just important to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Public affairs, they're going to release public affairs guidance for certain situations. And it's important to understand and keep in the back of your head. We had an opportunity in the VALEX during the scenario. We created some guidance, themes to stress, themes to avoid. In the ODAs, they took that and ran with it. At one point during one of the Cubs, someone mentioned something, and one of the ODA commanders chimed up and said, "Hey, we can't talk about that. That's a theme to avoid." So they internalized it, and that's good because that's just really important to keep in mind. For the audience as a whole, I think for task group leadership, you're gonna get asked about what the PSYDET's doing, right? Depending on your COCOM, everything's different, every mission's different, but chances are, you have a take on relationship with your PSYDET, and they're OPCON to somebody else. But CONOPS are still going to go up through the TG channels, SOTF, CJ SOTF, whatever it is. And so you're going to get asked questions about what the PSYDET's doing. So I think it's important to, put in the effort to understand their mission and what they're doing. And if, you're too bogged down and you have too much going on, trust that PSYDET commander to brief that stuff for you. Have him get on that Cub that he normally wouldn't be on with higher level leadership if they have a CONOP, and let them talk it,
Sure.
Especially if that higher level, if that higher echelon does not have a PSYOP planner, because that could be the case. And if they don't have one, it's really just you're going off the dome to a higher level SF officer, and you don't have any PSYOP input on that, and things might be presented the wrong way. Not saying that has happened or it did for our rotation, but
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I think it's important.
It's definitely the opportunity. It's definitely an opportunity for it to happen. I mean, as you're in command of all of these different things, there's things that very well, and there's things that you have a functional understanding of. And sometimes if you're pinned down to ask questions about something that maybe you don't have the same level of understanding that you have in your own sort of specialty. So it totally makes sense. We talk about, as we shift sort of towards this Eastern European current situation, we talk about information quite a bit. I can remember from my own career early on, prior to it being so easy for information to be splashed across the internet right away, the day after an op, there was an ease in SOF of being sort of quiet professional, working in the shadows and doing the things that the nation needed us to do without necessarily having to worry about global information operations. You're still having to worry about, public perception. You're still having to worry about, esprit de corps of your partners, all those things. You're still having to worry about information, but it wasn't the same. And then early in global war on terrorism, we started seeing like the enemy, if you're a listener from outside of SOF, outside the military, et cetera, we would go into a place in Afghanistan or Iraq, and it would be a bad house. It would have enemies in it. It would be the right place to hit at the right time. We would go in, either capture or kill those bad guys, and specifically the bodies that were left behind. We would exfil, we would go back to base, we'd get ready for the next mission, and the next morning, all of a sudden, the enemy has taken those dead bodies, they've removed the guns, they've moved them into a mosque, taken a bunch of pictures, and then splashed it up into the early days of the internet and saying like, hey, all these Americans came in and killed all of these, imams in this mosque, right? And all of a sudden you started seeing like, oh man, there's an information operation as part of this global war on terrorism thing, right? Fast forward through all of that as we started to learn that and realize, like, hey, how can we counter that? How can we use PSYOPs? How can we use just better techniques and tactics and procedures, standard operating procedures, to ensure that we have captured pictures of the scene and ensured that everybody knows that we did the right thing. But now you fast forward into this current Eastern European turmoil, and you see the information warfare, not just in that continent, I mean, across to our shores, all over the place, of either misinformation, disinformation, all sorts of things happening at the speed of light. And it's fascinating for us watching it from over here. But for the past 6 months, you guys have been able to observe this current, Ukrainian, Eastern European conflict. You guys have been able to observe that from European soil. So I'm super curious from your perspective, like, what observations can you give us on what we've seen play out in that information environment, in the last 8 to 9 months?
Yeah, there's a lot to cover there, Matt, and it's ever changing and it's constantly evolving. Russia is, it's fairly recognized as a disinformation powerhouse.
Sure.
We live in an information age. With that comes a lot of disinformation and misinformation along the way. There's a couple common themes that Russia's been pushing for a while. That you can find all of this on open source, of course.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest one since 2014 has been the Russophobia, right? The maltreatment or mistreatment of ethnic Russians all over the world, specifically in the Donbass, is related to Ukraine in the East.
Yeah.
NATO's the aggressor. They're pushing up, on Russian borders. They're violating the agreements, the original agreements of NATO. The collapse of Western civilization is imminent. They're weak. They're not strong. All the color revolutions were Western-backed, U.S.-sponsored, fascist revolutions, right? And really, they make reality whatever they want it to be. They have this fire hose of falseness, sure. High volume, multi-channel, rapid, continuous, repetitive propaganda machine. A lot of that comes from the Internet Research Agency, the bot farm that everybody's heard about.
Yeah.
They have people working 12-hour shifts, pumping out a minimum of 130 something comments a day, with a minimum of 200 characters. And they're pushing, disinformation. And then, it's not always picked up by the news or by the media, but when it is, now it's being spread as misinformation, right?
Yeah.
Misinformation, you think it's true, but it's not. Disinformation, it's true, but you say it anyways, right? So it originates as disinformation, and then it gets spread as misinformation. I would say that Russia had a fairly strong hold on the information domain pre-incursion, but I think if you ask anybody that's been following the information environment post-incursion, they would say that Ukraine is winning the information war, and I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think that's partly due to the fact that Russia has not really changed their narratives. Ukraine is ran by a bunch of Nazis. All the narratives that I spoke on earlier, they haven't changed that, and there's really no solid proof. And everybody kind of knows that Russia is a disinformation powerhouse, so it's expected.
Yeah.
And what they lacked was a propaganda boost from something like a false flag operation to justify or gain stronger justification to invade Ukraine.
Yeah.
The White House came out and said, we have information that Russia's planning a false flag operation in the East.
Yeah.
They use the words like, trained operatives in urban warfare and explosives. They're going to create a video with paid actors and corpses and essentially blame Ukraine for that action against, ethnic Russians in the East.
Right.
And then they could take advantage of that propaganda boost to at least initially justify, or, of course, on their side, justify the invasion. But they didn't have that. And I think, there's a very strategic and deliberate use of information from the White House over the past few months. That was a message in and of itself. I mean, that was information operations saying that.
Yeah.
Now they have, hey, if Russia did do that, hey, we said this was going to happen.
Yeah.
And that gives people the time to actually do the analysis on it to see what actually happened versus something happening in the environment. It's seemingly true. There's a video, and then they take advantage of it.
At least planting that information seed, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Zelensky and the Ukrainian government, they've had, they've responded with information versus disinformation. They'll publicize and amplify messages. Russia killed X amount of civilians in X city. It's a fact. It's information. This building was struck by, Russian missiles on Tuesday. It's a fact. It's information. And, at least Western Europe, and I would argue most of the world, they see that, and that's the message that gets amplified versus Russia's old disinformation narratives.
Yeah.
And then of course you have Zelensky that, he played the role as that leader on the ground. He dressed down in roughs. He grew a beard. Yeah. He took selfie videos in Kyiv saying that he was still with his people. He inspired not only the Ukrainian people, but the rest of the world, especially Europe. And you have Russian leadership on the other side doing the complete opposite.
Yeah.
So I would argue that Ukraine is winning the information war right now as it relates to Ukraine specifically. But that's not to say Russia hasn't looked elsewhere. They of course have a very broad scope of dissemination all over the world, especially in places like India and Africa. They've increased their disinformation in other regions, and of course closed off Western media in their own country. And I think that's that's MOE. That's a measure of effectiveness right there. They don't want Russian civilians to see what the rest of the world is saying about what's going on. And they've looked internal to ensure that their own people support the cause and ensure that, they maintain popular support for what they're doing with their own people. I'll pause there. That was
it's great. No, that's phenomenal. I mean, super interesting, especially, I'm not a Europe guy. I was a Central and South America guy, obviously a GWAT, CENTCOM guy, but that was my impression from the outside, completely from the outside, just what I read on, social media and whatever else. It seemed like, it's interesting to me, like propaganda back in the day, it was like state-sponsored propaganda on both sides, and it just sort of like we're firing leaflets and posters and, messages back and forth from sort of official, or, very thinly cloaked propaganda, from sort of a nation state, as opposed to like, hey, I'm going to create this farm, this bot farm type of deal where I'm going to have people, trying to pose as either American citizens or whoever else, in just the scope of having to have that propaganda machine down into your own populace in Russia, but also across the world, as you said, the breadth of that to be trying to get that into Africa, into Asia, into obviously into our shores, to try to weaken, public support of our nation, of our military, all those things. It's fascinating. And like I said, from the outside, I agree. The information swing prior to the incursion seemed to be in one corner, and then very quickly afterwards, what can we learn from how well Ukraine responded to that in order to flip those scales? Like, what can we learn from that in SOF or just generally as Americans?
I'd say that I think that rapport matters. Rapport matters. From the ground level, PSYDET or ODA or SIMC, or even at the national level where you have your Zelensky, you see all of the trips from the delegates across the world going over to reassure everyone that rapport is there between their nation and Zelensky. It's the same with us down at the tactical level when it comes to the European PSYOP partners across the region. Since 2014, everyone's been dealing with the same aggressor, the same tactics, the same just crap coming across their borders all the time. You got this adversary not missing an opportunity to take advantage of any type of dissent that comes from migrations that they cause, or, any type of law that's beneficial for them to exploit. That's another country's prerogative. They exploit it, they blow it up, and, all of the partners across the region, they understand these tactics. And because of all of the rotations to that theater and all of the exercises and all of the shared experiences and just working together, trust has been established with the different PSYDETs and then their partners. And so when faces that are familiar come into their offices to talk about familiar problem sets, and then trying to come up with a solution or a concept to try to counter it or do something about it, it means more when the people know each other and when they've gone through things together. Same with Afghanistan, with all the rotations, the rapport is there, and it makes it easier to try to combat some of the problems that you're seeing. And that's what we try to do as a PSYDET. That's what the SIMC we were over there with was trying to do. And the same thing with the ODAs. The biggest thing is rapport, knowing your partners, getting out there, continuing the exercises. Things get tough sometimes. There'll be some aggravations. However, nothing beats those shared experiences where you've done something together, the trust has been earned, and now they're welcoming you into the rooms to talk about the problems together, not in a forcible manner. They're welcoming you in so that you could look at the problem together and come up with the solution and effectively go after some of the stuff you're seeing in the information environment and with the war. So
no, I think it's a great point, man. Will, because you talk about trust, as you talk about relationship, we always talk about partnership, all of these things. One of my favorite quotes that I kind of say all the time because it's so applicable to so many different things was from Admiral McCraven, talking about trust is the currency on which we operate, and it can't be surged. So this, if you've got, if you're trying to make a decision in this case between information coming from somewhere that can't be trusted, or coming from somewhere you're like, okay, we've got a relationship with them and we believe that they are probably trying to give us the right information, it's 100%, better than, I'm completely tossed up on, I don't trust either one of these. And so that maintenance of trust and that building of trust can't just happen after the conflict starts. It's got to be fostered. It's got to be maintained. It's got to be maintained, to your point, all the way from that tactical level of trust in between those, between us and our partners, in between, partners and other partners in the area, but all the way up into the, into the national and international sort of stratosphere. It's a great point. CJ, as we talk about, sort of what we can learn from this current environment, what we can learn from being good partners. I know you guys have had the opportunity to work directly with partners with similar skill sets and do some, as you said earlier, some mill-to-mill, partner force operations specific to psychological operations. What's your feedback to that? How can we, what'd you learn from that? What can we learn as a broader audience from your experience?
Yeah, I think first off, you get a mission, you're going to go do some stuff with military partners, and your first thought is, okay, like I'm going to teach them the PSYOP process. This is how to do influence operations. Well, at least in EUCOM, chances are they're fairly familiar with that process.
Yeah.
A lot of the partners in Europe are very skilled and have been dealing with this at a much more personal level for a long time. So if you show up there, with a PowerPoint on, this is the definition of influence or disinformation, they're probably gonna,
sure.
I mean, they'll sit through it,
yeah,
but after
you're not building
like,
trust.
Oh, man, yeah. So, I think, in our experience, we, going back to what Wilk said with trust, when the conditions changed in the environment, because of the trust that we had with our partners, they opened up and we were able to, do things and discuss stuff that previously was not feasible. It wasn't even, part of a TCO task or an IMO. And I think that's huge. So I think if you're, going into a new environment where conditions have, been the same and are projected to stay the same, and you're trying to figure out what to do with these partners, I would ask them, hey, what do you guys need?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is there a campaign that you guys want, our opinion on? Don't just go in there and think that you're going to, teach them how to do PSYOP just because you got your PowerPoint from the schoolhouse. Because
sure.
And like I said, in UConn, they're much more knowledgeable than that. So I think that's the biggest lesson is just be aware of the skill set of your partners. And regardless of what your IMOs and TCOs say, try to find out exactly what they need and make those recommendations to, higher echelons. Hey, they don't need this anymore. They don't need help with their PMT or their, whatever it is. We'll spare the specifics. They're asking for this. And then hopefully you get that change in the, in the orders process, and then you can actually execute it with these versus having to send it a con off for new authorities or permissions or whatever it is.
No, it's a great point. And we talk a lot about this shift from GWAT to competition. Competition's not new, right? We've been doing it all during the time of GWAT, especially those of us who had areas of responsibility in other places other than CENTCOM. We do combat rotations. We're also still doing competition in a lot of places. And I think it's a great point, CJ, like competition is certainly not new to them, right? And so as we're making this shift, like we're learning and evolving, but a lot of them have been in the trenches of competition their entire lives, right? And especially in the information support, sort of arena, they've been doing this quite a bit. And there's much more of an opportunity of an exchange where we can learn a lot of things, I'd imagine as well. As we kind of draw up our time here, I want to give each of you sort of an opportunity for some closing comments. Is there anything that you want to, talk about that maybe we haven't touched on, or is there anything you want to leave our listeners specifically across sort of the SOF enterprise? Wilk, I'll go to you first, and then CJ, you can close us up.
I guess to close things out, I'd say that knowing what I now know about the regiment, about this job, I wish I hadn't wasted so much time to come over. I had the opportunity to come over in 2012. I actually came over to this regiment in 2014. And had I known that the opportunities to go out, establish rapport with partners across Europe, build lifelong friendships that involve folks checking up on me, during tough times, during the good times, from different ethnicities, different countries, like legitimate brothers. I definitely would have done this a long time ago, understanding that you have the opportunities to be inside the embassies and to just the limitless opportunities that come along with this job. I would have done it a lot sooner. And outside of that, if there's one thing I could add to, as far as a training opportunity for our regiment, definitely something over in the schoolhouse, or maybe as an additional school opportunity for folks who are already at the detachment, some type of influence and resistance training. NRC is great. It's the wide scope to resistance. However, something more specific to influence and resistance, I think would go a long ways, and I think is very relevant to today's problem set.
Yeah, that's great. CJ, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I think we covered a lot of great topics. So I'll just close out some highlights and some recommendations for various elements for task groups. I think it's key to put in the effort to understand what PSYOP does, because like I said, you will be asked about it. Yeah. And if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, have that trust with your PSYDET commander or leadership to either, back brief you and give you that information or brief it themselves. For everybody, integrate as early as possible. Once you know your rotation and who's going to be on it, integrate with them as soon as you can. CJ's hot take is we should be co-located with, our COCOM aligned SF group. I think that's if you're going to look forward for cross-functional teams as a standard moving forward, that's an eventuality. And, you might as well tear the Band-Aid off, because it's only going to get you're only going to give people more heartache by keeping them away longer. But that's not, that's my personal opinion. But
it makes sense to me. I like the hot take. Sounds good.
Yeah. And then, for any PSYOPers that are listening, when it comes to PMT, your best source of information is the team forward. When it comes to things that they wish they had for, what they're experiencing in the environment currently, having a good understanding of the environment in general will help you understand your place in information operations, because it's a broad scope. And you're obviously not there to do everything yourself. There's other people conducting other activities. You don't have to be an expert, you don't have to be a PhD level expert on your COCOM, but have a general understanding of what's going on. And again, the team forward is going to be probably your best bet for getting that information. Stay away from the CIA fact book when you're doing PMISA. You can just reach out to the team forward or first IO command, or, use your road to war brief as a launch point for some deep dive into research yourself. But I think that's the biggest takeaway. And then, I think that's it.
No, it's great. All right. Before I wrap us up, though, I got to ask one question. PSYOPs finally came out with like a badass video, Ghost of the Machine. I want your opinion on it. It popped up on my feed. I'm like, hey, look at this, pretty dope. As two guys, literally just coming back from very, some very critical operational employment. What'd you think?
Hey, we are the ghosts in the machine.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. No. It's a very, very interesting video. I think, not to say we do or don't do any of those activities, but as far as a recruitment tool, I think it's an awesome video.
And what I'd add is our partners across the region have taken note. And they've reached out and they dig it. So I'm all for it.
No, it's great.
People are sending us this video like, oh, this is you guys, like, it's pretty badass.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
I know Alex Jones had a pretty interesting take on it. I still got to watch that, but I won't confirm or deny anything, just to keep it out there in case he listens to this. He can break down this podcast too. Maybe that'll be his next episode.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, gents, I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time on behalf of General Clark and all of us here at US SOCOM. Thanks for taking the time to help us better understand your experience, better understand PSYOPs, and I know our listeners. I speak on behalf of them as well. Thanks for helping us broaden our perspective, and listeners, thank you all for tuning in to another episode of SOFcast. This is one of the few places, if not the only place on earth, where you can get like from the team room perspective from people who literally just redeployed from operating in Eastern Europe and looking at these exact problems. And so we're blessed to be able to have amazing people across our enterprise. And here at SOFcast, we're blessed to be able to pull some of them in and pick their brains. So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. Take a moment right now, pop down. If you don't already subscribe to us, please do. I'd ask you to give us a good rating. It really does help. Throw a 5-star rating, throw a thumbs up on YouTube. It really does help others find the show. And, if you really like this one, if you like our show, take it a step further. hit that share button, share it to either somebody on your team, somebody outside of SOF that you think might find value in this and might be able to look and say, hey, I might want to do that one day. Go ahead and check out US SOCOM at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can find me at Matt Parrish or Matt.Parrish60 on a lot of those places or on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear your feedback. The last place that you can give us feedback, but it's the thing that we check the most, SOFcast at SOCOM.mil. We really do shape, this is one of the episodes that came from people email us, say, hey, I want to learn more about, I hear information warfare, I hear PSYOPs, I see what's going on in Europe. I want to know about it. And so thanks for the sort of the critiques and comments and everything that you've given us so far. It really does help to shape the show. And thanks again for listening to another episode of SOFcast.